Welcome,
Hey,
everyone. Hi, Arpit. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you, Lex. Thanks for having me. This is
Thank you for
exciting.
being here. We're so excited. Today, we're doing tracking plans, the good, the bad, the unusable. And we have Arpit here from Data Led Academy, who is going to share some of his insights into what makes a tracking plan great or what makes it unusable. And so, welcome, Arpit. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to be here. So, you know, I started Data Led Academy as a side project, and it was essentially a result of me writing an ebook where I basically wanted to share everything that I learned setting up tracking for Integromat, where I was heading growth for a long time, and primarily because after I'd gone through the ordeal, I realized that I was able to do a good job at it because I was very intentional about it, and I sort of constantly learned about this stuff, but there wasn't any good resource that sort of helps people, a vendor agnostic resource, I should say. That of course a lot of resources from different vendors. So yeah, I wrote this ebook, and then I realized that it's too dense and no one's going to read it. So I essentially converted that into a bunch of guides and published it on Data Led Academy. And now Data Led Academy, I'm trying to build it into a place where people can go and get expert, unbiased, actionable answers to all their data-related questions. So questions about tools, technologies, people, and processes, and at the same time learn how to work with data. And primarily focused on less technical people, so people working in product growth, operations, marketing, etc. So yeah, and this is the topic that I love talking about, and I've helped many companies set up their tracking plans. So yeah, really excited for this.
I love that story. I wrote an ebook and I knew no one would read it. So I turned
Yeah,
it into
it's
a bunch
true.
of actionable guides. I know it is true. And you're so right that there are very few resources for folks to learn about tracking that aren't coming from the tools themselves. So
Yeah,
we appreciate the work that you're doing.
thank you.
And my background is also on the non-technical side of analytics. I'm a designer. And I'm
Hmm.
here representing the Right Track community. So if folks are watching, we have a community for people that are interested in data and analytics. Arpit is one of our community members, and you can check it out and join us at therighttrack.avo.app.
Yeah.
Avo, if you're not familiar with Avo, is an analytics tracking plan management tool. And so it's a data governance tool. And that's what we're here to talk about today, how to make sure that your tracking plan is kept up to date, that it's meaningful, that it's human, all of the things that make it usable and valuable to learning from your data.
Yeah.
So why don't we start there, Arpit? What's important about a tracking plan? Why have one?
Yeah, great question. So I think a tracking plan, just like being intentional about creating a tracking plan, can go a long way. But like I would say, the four core benefits of creating a tracking plan are basically ease of implementation. So once you have a tracking plan, and a tracking plan is something you create even before you start implementation. I think a classic mistake a lot of people do is they do a lot of research on the tools, and then they decide to use a bunch of tools. And once they purchase those tools, they just hand it over to their engineering team and be like, okay, now just implement the tools. And they're like really excited to use the tools, but they don't realize that the implementation bit is so important. And if they don't get it right, then all their efforts and money will go down the drain. So you basically start creating a tracking plan much before you end up buying a tool, because you start paying for the tool, and implementations can sometimes take months, can go up to 3 months depending on your product and the resources that you have. So I think the most important thing to keep in mind is that once you have a tracking plan, it could be as simple as a Google Sheet. You actually make the implementation process really easy. And then secondly, it acts as like a ready reckoner. So when you start working with the actual tools, whether it's a product analytics tool or an engagement tool like Intercom, etc., any tool that relies on events you're tracking, you can actually go back to your tracking plan and refer to those events when you're using those tools, because it just makes it easy to understand, especially when you have a lot of events, or like events that sound similar. No matter how hard you try, it just gets confusing. And then when there's a new team member on you can easily have them go through the tracking plan, understand exactly what data is tracked, how it's tracked, and then which tools it's available in. And then one other thing that I would definitely want to mention is knowledge transfer. So, a lot of, and this is something very common where someone joins a company and they look at the tools and then they're like, okay, what does this event mean? What does that event mean? And the typical response is that, oh, we don't know the person who implemented it. It's no longer with us. And that's pretty common, right?
It is. It's shockingly common.
Yeah, it's shockingly common, and they're like, okay, we don't know, maybe I will try to find out, and it's just such a waste of time, and it just sort of takes away, like I've been in this situation, so I can say for sure that it just takes away all the excitement from a new joinee who wants to like get their hands dirty and start working, because they don't have the basics, like you're supposed to you have all the tools, and the company's paying for the tools, and your job is to basically use those tools to activate users or keep them engaged, but you're not able to do your job because you don't know what event means what, and then you start guessing and you start creating campaigns, and then you hope that they work, but the problem is you don't even know why they're not working. You don't know if they're not working because your content is not good or your analysis is not good, or whether the event is just incorrect. And it takes a while for you to figure that out. So so knowledge transfer is huge, implementation, and then ready reckoner. I think, these are three main things I would say you should create a tracking plan.
Yeah. And you mentioned, you don't know whether or not something is working because you don't know if it's the underlying data or if it's actually the implementation of the feature. And so that's partially why I think growth folks are so passionate about tracking plans, because so many growth, as you know, you've worked in growth, I've worked in growth. You join a company, one of the first things you do is take a look at that infrastructure and look at the tracking plan and see if you can rely on that information.
Yeah.
So speaking to that, we were talking before we went live about who should own tracking plans. That's a question that comes up all the time. So what's your take on that? Who should own it?
Yeah, I mean, I actually advocate for a tracking manager or an operation manager, depending on whatever you want to call it. But essentially, this person sits at the intersection of product growth and a data team. If you have a data team, a lot of companies may not have dedicated data teams. So basically, this person will be collaborating with the engineers who are either data engineers or whatever engineers who are basically implementing your tracking or implementing the instrumentation. And then the product team, obviously, and the marketing or the growth team. People from those teams will eventually be consuming these events in the tools that they use. So this person could be a marketer, could be a growth person, could be a product person, but they should sort of own it, and they should make sure that everything is correct. They should collaborate with other team members, have them contribute, and then make sure that all the events are as per the taxonomy, and the right properties are being defined, and so on. So there is no fixed role for someone who owns the tracking plan. It could be someone who works as a product manager or works as a head of growth. But for mid-sized companies, I would say that there is sort of room for someone to work on it, own it, and maybe this could even become a dedicated role, because a lot with mid-sized companies, there's always like a steady inflow of new events that different teams want to track. As the product gets updated, new features are released, there's always a backlog of events. I've had product managers tell me that, okay, we've released this feature, but we don't know if it's being instrumented. We don't see it on Amplitude, or it's missing on Intercom, or it's there, but we don't know whether this is actually being tracked client side or server side. So we're not able to basically measure the impact. So I think for mid-sized companies,
we have no idea if anyone bothers to measure it.
Yeah, and generally no one wants to take this up because it sounds like a small piece, but it is pretty sort of it's heavy work. You really have to be careful. If you're overwhelmed with a bunch of tasks, you're bound to make mistakes. You're bound to overlook mistakes. And assuming that you're just using a Google Sheet, it's easy to make mistakes, and then you'd have different people contributing to it. Someone just delays the row by mistake, or it's really easy to like mess it up. So that person will make sure that there are multiple copies. They'll also do audits. I think tracking plan audit is something really important, where on a scheduled basis, you maybe every month or every 2 months you sort of audit your tracking plan and make sure that everything is being tracked correctly. Test those events. So yeah, I mean, this could definitely be like a full-time job.
It really could be, and it has been one for folks who've taken this on in their companies, which is why I think people hesitate to do it. But we see a future where this can all be better, which is why we're here today to talk about some of the ways that it can be better. And I think let's get into it. We're going to share some tracking plans. We're going to talk about whether or not that they are meaningful. Are they tracking actionable information about the product? We're going to talk about whether or not they're scalable. Will they grow with the product team? As Arpit mentioned, when folks are adding new events, will that pattern grow? Are they human? Do they make sense? Are they easy for folks to understand without a lot of documentation? And are they documented? Because we do know that we need the docs to onboard and make sure folks have that knowledge transfer that you mentioned. We have some comments. Thanks, everyone. Hi, everyone. You can chat with us on YouTube. You can also chat with us in the Right Track Slack. And we want to invite you to send us your tracking plan while we are doing this event. We're going to get into it, and then we'll try to pull up any late submissions of tracking plans.
Sounds great.
So let's get going. Okay, so we're going to start with this tracking plan. This is a meditation app tracking plan. And as a reminder, we're looking at these 4 things. We're looking at meaningful, scalable, human, and documented. We're going to go through each one. So let's just take a pause and say, any initial reactions to this tracking plan? This is onboarding tracking for a meditation app. Any initial thoughts right off the bat looking at the plan?
Yeah, I think I find the events confusing, especially the way they're named. I believe they're not following some of the best practices that we all advocate for. The descriptions are there, the properties, property value type. Okay, it's not too bad. It's actually, it's not too bad at all.
Not too bad.
It's a couple of things that I would say is missing, like especially in terms of column that should be there. One is definitely the source of the event. So like we briefly talked about, where is this event being tracked? Is it happening client side or server side? You could track like the sign up event client side, which will be fired when someone clicks the sign up button, versus if it's being tracked server side, it'll be fired only when the account is actually created in the database. So I think it's important to have that column. And another column that I would definitely mention is worth adding is the owner. In my experience, I've seen that usually there are multiple people who are involved when it comes to implementation. There might be a different engineer implementing client-side events, someone else will be doing server-side events. So, specifying who owns the event in terms of implementing it is really helpful.
So that's the engineer who's going to implement the code?
Yes, yeah. Okay. The engineer is going to implement the code. That's correct.
I think that's interesting. I feel like you could also do ownership by team, like this is the growth onboarding team or something like that, in case folks leave the company.
Yeah, for sure. I think the categorization can definitely be improved. We can have like different categories and specify who owns that set of events, and then who's implementing those events. So there's definitely scope to add more information. Another thing that if you scroll to the right, I think one of the things that I've seen is really helpful is to specify the destination. So Of course, typically people start with a tracking plan when they're implementing a product analytics tool, but the same data, the same events are also eventually sent to engagement tools, event-driven engagement tools like Intercom, Customer IO, Braze, whatever. Could also be sent to your in-app experiences tool, like tools that you're using for in-app onboarding. There's a bunch of tools there. So if you specify the destinations that an event is being sent to, because there's often a case where a certain event is only being sent to a certain destination, whereas another event is being sent to a different destination. So I think that's pretty useful. It's also important to specify it for the engineer, because if you're and something that again I've experienced where we've implemented 3 tools at the same time, and if we hadn't specified which event should go where, well, the engineer would just send everything everywhere, and that is actually a problem because having too many events in your tools can actually make things a lot more complicated instead of simplifying things.
Yeah, that's the scalable piece, right? It's also can be really expensive because some tools charge by the number of events that you're sending.
Oh yeah. That's actually a great point. I completely forgot about that. That's actually really important. Yeah.
Where do you think they got this? I've never seen this pattern before of the colons. Where do you think that came from?
Yeah, I've never seen it either. That's what I found very strange. Like, ideally, an event name should be such that one can easily understand what it is, because these event names are being consumed in different tools, and in your product analytics tool or engagement tool, and it's really easy to make a mistake in those tools. Like you choose the wrong event when you're setting up like an engagement campaign, an email campaign, and that just messes things up. It's very easy to do that. So these events that have FTUE, whatever that means, in front of every event, that's actually pretty confusing. So like one of the best practices that we know is to follow the object action framework, where you specify the object first and then the action. So screen viewed is following that framework, but the colon is actually weird. The screen viewed or page viewed.
Yeah, the colon is interesting. Why not just use a space? It's interesting. It'd be good to ask them about that. FTUE in this case is I think it's an acronym for a flow type, maybe like an experiment flow or something like that, because it shows up a few times in the properties.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's run through our rubric. In terms of, is this tracking plan meaningful? From what we can tell, obviously we don't work for this company, but from what we can tell, does it seem like they are tracking the most meaningful actions for their product?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're definitely tracking important events. So we can definitely say it's meaningful. The fact that they have a bunch of properties for each event, and the fact that they're describing the property and describing the property value, that itself makes life a lot easier. And they also have examples, so they're definitely meaningful.
Yeah, awesome. And then in terms of scalability, so we were just talking about that with the pattern. And with sending too many events in terms of, is it scalable? How scalable?
Yeah, I would say
pattern is.
It's really not scalable. Also because most of these event names are really long. So one of the challenges that people will face in the end tools, downstream tools, let's say Intercom, you're using Intercom to create your engagement campaigns or onboarding campaigns. You won't even be able to see the full event name in a lot of different, depending on where you are on the Intercom UI, you won't be able to see the full event name. So that just, it's a deal breaker. You'll have to do a bunch of things to make sure that you're selecting the right event every time you're doing that. So I think the event names should definitely be looked at.
Yeah, we'll give it a no on scalability. Okay, what about human? Do you feel like this plan is easy to look at and understand without documentation? How easy is it to grok from the naming?
Yeah, I think the fact that it contains the event description and the property description, that definitely makes it human. A lot of tracking plans don't have that, and without the description, it's definitely not human. You have no idea what that event means, what it's doing, when it's being fired. So I think we can call it human.
Yeah, I would say that this gives me pause, as you mentioned, the FTUE, the sort of name of the flow, makes it a little bit less human.
Yeah, it makes it very onboarding. Yeah.
If you're
So it
just
definitely
looking, if
makes
you're
it.
not having the tracking plan in front of you, if you're just looking at an
Oh
analytics tool or
yeah.
intercom, then you can't necessarily know what that
Yeah.
means.
Oh yeah, from that point of view, definitely not. But let's just assume that whoever is using those tools, they know what these events mean. So for them, at least at least they can sort of share it with someone and explain it to them. And so yeah, I think yeah, it's partially human, but the event names are definitely not good.
So that's tricky. We'll give them the benefit of the doubt here with our grading. Our last piece is it documented? So we were talking about some of the different columns that you'd like to see, client and server
Mhm.
side ownership. What other things would you like to see
Destination.
in this plan? Destination,
I would
sources,
say
yeah.
destination. Another thing I think the tracking plan is missing is separate tabs for user properties and account or organization properties. So while it does a good job of specifying the events and the event properties and property value types, etc., it's missing the user properties and in the case of B2B SaaS, you typically have an account structure or a workspace or an organization, whatever you want to call it. So you'd have properties attached to your account, such as pricing plan, etc. Everything that's account related, and then you'd have user properties, which basically like the user traits. So user's name, email, ID, a bunch of other things. So I think a good tracking plan will have those two tabs as well.
Yeah. All right. So we're gonna give them a no on that. So that not too bad. Not too
Yeah.
bad. 2 out of
Oh
4,
no,
I think
definitely
we gave
not.
them. Yeah.
Definitely seen
We
worse.
have seen worse. Even though the colon is questionable. All right, should we move on to the next plan?
Yeah.
So this is a plan for a design tool. So a tool that designers are using, sort of a workflow tool. All right, any
Yeah.
initial thoughts? Yeah, on this plan.
Yeah, I think I've seen this format before with like a bunch of dots in the event name, but again, like definitely not human, hard to understand. There's some forward slashes in the name event name, so again the event names are overtly complicated. They don't really it's not easy to understand what exactly happens unless you really like ideally you should be able to understand what happens just by taking a quick look at it and not like using your brain cells to understand, firstly read the event and then like figure out what exactly it means. So
Yeah. I think the fact that everything is pre-appended with app is so interesting because isn't it all an app? It's a funny convention to take on.
oh yeah, yeah, that's a good point. And then there are dashes also, so there is a lack of consistency,
I
which
think what we have
obviously
here
is.
is a case of multiple teams sending in their own naming
Yeah.
conventions.
Yes, yeah, definitely. And then even if you look at the event property names, they're just so overwhelming.
It's wild, some of these property
Yeah,
names. Yeah,
I'm not
yeah.
sure. So is it camel case? I think it is camel case, but
On the
it's a
property side,
version of
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
I
But for
think
some
so.
reason, I think the property names are either too long. Yeah, I think they're too long, and again, hard to read. Um,
Yeah,
so
yeah. And
okay,
you can see here that the property naming convention changes once you get
oh,
into. So
okay,
these are the events that are firing, on page visits and some of the earlier interactions someone is having, maybe a logged out experience. And
mm-hmm.
then once you get into creating a project, you can see that the property names
Right.
change and become a lot simpler.
Right, right.
So it definitely feels like a different team.
Yeah, yeah, different team, different people. Maybe whoever implemented first is no longer with the company. So pretty standard case. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, I mean the rest like is similar to the other one in terms of not having certain columns, not having separate tabs for user properties and account properties. But yeah, I think this one is the worst.
Okay, so let's go through our ranking. Is it meaningful? Does it track important actions that are going to give the team insights about how people are using the product?
As someone who's looking at it for the first time, I would say not exactly, because especially lack of consistency in the taxonomy, and then overtly complicated events and event properties is just like most people will look at it, and like in 30 seconds they'll shut the tab.
We'll give it a no on that. Yep. Yes. It does make data, I think, harder to use probably.
Yeah.
Which can turn some folks off who might be interested in learning about the usage of your product.
Absolutely.
Is it scalable? Is it a convention that will scale with the product and allow multiple teams to send in events?
I don't think so, because there's a lack of. What do you think?
We're gonna give it a no on that. Yeah, I mean, I think the fact that the naming convention didn't even scale team to team is a big warning sign.
Yes.
Right? Folks weren't even looking at that. They're looking at the data getting sent in from other teams probably and going, we're gonna do it a different way.
Yes.
And we have, I think, some of this. So plan name here is, what is that, proper case, I guess?
Yeah.
And then plan name also appears here, camel case.
Oh wow, that's a big problem.
I know. This is a nightmare in terms of for tracking plan managers.
It's better to not track anything.
If someone needs a job as a tracking plan manager, let us know. We will connect you with this company because they need your help.
Oh yeah, most definitely. They need to like redo their tracking if they really want to scale this. Otherwise, this is going to be difficult.
Yeah.
They literally have like so many different formats for the event property.
Yeah. Yes. It's a little bit of the Wild West. So would you say that this plan is human? Is it relatable? Easy to understand?
No. I don't think
no.
so. Sorry.
And is it well documented?
Certainly not.
Oh man, okay, 0 out of 4 for the design tool. We're shielding everyone from your identity, but do get in touch if you'd like to help this company. Yeah, this is certainly one of the wildest ones I've seen too. Like just a lot of information, but not insightful information.
Yeah, with these events, I think the problem is a classic problem where someone has just handed it over to the engineering team and be like, okay, just implement this tool, and they haven't really provided any context. They haven't told them why these events are to be tracked, and how people are going to consume those events in the different tools. So they've just named it whatever without even thinking. Like they probably don't even realize that people would be looking at these events, looking at these names in different tools and trying to make sense of it. Because if they had that sort of thought in their head, they wouldn't name it like this.
Yeah. We talk about that a bit at Avo. What kind of context do engineers need about analytics?
Yeah, so I think, well, it also depends on whether the engineer is a data engineer and they have experience setting up similar stuff before. If not, if they're a software engineer and they haven't really set up anything like this before, and I've had this experience firsthand, so I can tell that you really need to tell them firstly why you want to track certain events and how you're going to use them, and then also like tell them that you're not going to use them just in a product analytics tool, but give them a complete picture that you're actually going to use these events to like personalize the emails that people receive or the messages that they receive, or you're going to send these events to the support tools so that the support team can see what events someone has performed when they've opened a support ticket, so that they can be more proactive and not ask them to do things that they've already done. So if you provide that context, then like it just becomes a lot more clear for the engineer, and they also, and then they start asking the right questions, and then they're also like very sort of mindful about naming the events and everything. And the ideal scenario is not for the engineer to name the events at all. So the ideal scenario is for the the owner of the tracking plan, the growth person or the product person to actually decide the taxonomy and name the events, name the properties, and then just have the engineers implement them.
Yeah. Yeah, or to have the engineers collaborate maybe on the naming convention or some of the things that are going to become patterns, I
Oh
think can
yeah,
be great too.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Like you definitely need their input. And sometimes like an engineer might say that, okay, your naming convention is fine, but like I still have to change it internally for the implementation purpose. For instance, if you want proper case, an engineer will not be able to implement the events in proper case. So they'll have to use like snake case or something, and then they'll say that we'll make the events appear as proper case. You know what I mean? So
Mhm.
basically, sometimes there's a different internal name, and then there's a different name that is visible. Um,
Yeah.
it's something that I've sort of seen, and obviously engineers have more experience sort of with naming conventions and stuff. So if you don't have that sort of knowledge, you should definitely consult them and ask them what is their preferred naming convention, whether it's snake case or camel case or proper case or whatever.
Yeah. Do you have a preferred convention?
Yeah, I like snake case. I think snake case is just it just works everywhere. And but for the event name, frankly, like okay, so my preference is actually to have snake case for the property name and proper case for the event name. Because if you have the same sort of case for event name and property name, it just gets really confusing. Like at a glance, you can't sort of differentiate between the two. And sometimes you'd have properties that sound very similar to events. So it just sort of plays tricks in your head. So
Interesting. Yeah.
definitely have like two separate um, conventions for the event name and the property name.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. I'm a fan of camel case. I like camel case a lot, especially for properties.
Okay, that's nice.
We have a late breaking comment that I missed. Alex, always use camel case. Thank you. Yes, Alex, on the same page with that. Vinay said another problem we were talking about the prefix, going back to that, the drop
Yeah.
downs. This is in the analytics tool itself.
Yes, I think we
This,
mentioned this briefly. It's the same with like tools like Intercom, etc., where you're looking at the event in a drop down, and then you don't see the full event name. You only see
yeah,
the first half of it.
yeah, and in the charts too, it can get truncated, and that's just
Yeah.
a nightmare. Which is another reason why you save that space a little bit and you just use camel case. No case shame. You can
Okay.
use whatever case you prefer.
Yeah. Just keep it consistent is what matters the most.
That's right. Keep it consistent. All right. Speaking of consistency, let's go to our next plan. So this is a tracking plan from the Reforge team.
Yep.
And one of the things right off the bat we were chatting about is screenshots. So what's your take on including screenshots in a tracking plan?
So I personally find screenshots a little overwhelming. I personally also think that it doesn't add a lot of value. It does add some value. Obviously, it's not useless, but it also makes like visually it's not very pleasing because you have these screenshots that are so tiny, so you can't even like make sense of it unless you zoom into it and stuff. But there's definitely sort of value to having screenshots. But I think if someone does a really good job at naming the events, describing each event, describing the properties, then the screenshots may not be needed. And then of course you have to keep them updated as your design keeps changing or features keep changing. So that's also an additional task with screenshots. But I know you
Yeah.
like screenshots, so
I like
um,
screenshots, but I think that it's an interesting sort of goal to say, can we get this tracking plan well enough documented that someone really doesn't need the screenshots, that they really can glean between
yeah.
client versus server side, the way that the events are named and defined. Can they glean it correctly from that?
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. And someone who understands, I think one other thing is that whoever's looking at the tracking plan, they need to understand the product well. If they don't understand the product well, then they obviously won't understand anything, even if you define it really well. So they should at least have a good understanding of your product and the different user journeys, so as to understand what's going on here. So yeah, I'm not against screenshot, but I just feel like it's a little overwhelming.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've started to see some designers documenting events in Figma or in their design tool. And so that could be interesting as a way to define your tracking using the screenshots, but maybe not have it live forever in the tracking plan.
Yeah, yeah.
Similar to the collaborating with both design and engineering.
Yes, for sure. And then I believe this one is okay. It has a trigger event field. The event names are good. Property types are there. They have the data types, descriptions. Yeah, like no surprise that this is a pretty good comprehensive tracking plan. It's still missing some of those columns that I would definitely have, like, whether the event is being tracked client side or server side. So like a column called source maybe, and then the owner. I think it's also missing categories, right? There's no categorization. So it's like a long list of events, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How do you handle managing different properties? Because if properties come back a few times in a tracking plan, how would you advise folks handle that?
Okay, so I mean, I think it's okay to specify, like you must specify the properties that you want to use, that you want to basically associate with an event. So even if you want to use the same property with multiple events, you must specify it. So I think that's not too bad. What do you say? Yeah.
I like to keep them in a separate, like I think I would keep some of this detail on what the property is, maybe in a separate tab, and then
Okay.
just reference the property and then find the detail on it in a different tab, I think.
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah. So not have the example values for each property every time in the
think so. I
description.
feel like that can get quite repetitive.
Yeah, yeah. I'm not sure if it's super common to have the same property with a lot of events, but and also I think here, like the example properties also like sort of change for the same property, so that could be a little confusing.
Right, exactly. And I think that's something that Thora at Avo talks about a lot is, thinking about those properties as scalable on their own. Will this property be able to contain all the values that it will contain as your product grows? She talks a lot
Yeah,
about not doing too many Booleans.
right, right. Yeah, I also think having this in the data slash property type column, having event property and then people property, it's a little overwhelming. What I would definitely recommend is having a separate tab for all your people properties or user properties, and then a separate tab for your account or organization workspace properties. And then this field can just contain the property type. Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
I agree with that too.
Property type
Definitely.
as in the data type, not exactly. Property type is also a little confusing. It's actually the data type and not exactly property type, I would say.
Yeah, yeah. It is interesting that they're combining event and people properties on an event like this. It seems kind of odd
Yeah.
to
So
do
for
that.
instance, you do want to send some people properties or user properties with certain events, like it's pretty standard to send obviously the user ID for every property, that every event that you want to associate to a user, or the organization, the workspace ID with every event that you want to associate with the workspace. Most people don't end up documenting it because it's like sort of obvious, and but it can be helpful to document that. But I don't think it needs to be. I mean, the format could be improved, and we
Yeah.
can refer to one of my tracking plan templates where I've actually done this. So we can get to that later.
Yeah. All right, let's give it some scores. So is this tracking plan meaningful? This is an invoicing tool. Is it tracking the events that map to the value the users are getting out of the product? Is it meaningful for the product team?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. This is a pretty good tracking plan. Of course, every tracking plan can be improved, but it's pretty comprehensive.
Awesome. Is it scalable? Is the plan for events and properties scalable?
Yeah, I think so. I think they're maintaining a standard taxonomy, so definitely scalable.
Great. Yeah, definitely see the naming convention. And I think it's so cool that they put the naming convention in the columns.
Yes. Yeah.
Is it human? Do you feel like it's clear grokking the event names and the property names?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's pretty clear to understand. New invoice started, you can take a guess at what that means, and it's probably pretty close to what that event is tracking.
Mm-hmm.
And then in terms of documentation, well documented, not well documented.
That's a bit tricky because I feel it's missing the user properties, which should be there in a separate tab. From my point of view, it's missing the source of the event. Although they've specified when the event is triggered, but again, like specifying client side or server side just makes things easier. And since it's an invoicing tool, it's a B2B SaaS tool, so it should have some organization or account properties as well. Basic stuff like plan name, bunch of other properties that are associated.
Company name or something like that too.
Yeah, account name, plan name, company name, and yeah, there are a bunch. I just can't sort of.
Yeah, we might have an example of that in here. We'll see. So
even
number of.
Yeah, I think one important company property is like number of users or number of number of users or number of collaborators, like number of people who are part of that account. I think that's useful. That's a useful metric. So having those documented would definitely improve this plan.
Yeah. Awesome. So 3 out of 4, pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
And we're torn on the screenshots. So we're going to go with no. I think for now on the screenshots definitely would make this plan cleaner. Let's move on to another B2B company. So this is a plan from Amplitude. This is one of their sample plans.
Right.
And we do have some account level properties in here.
Mm-hmm.
So that's good. And we have user properties as well.
So this is Amplitude's own tracking plan, right?
It's not. It's a sample plan from them. So it's
okay.
a tracking plan sample for a B2B company. Yeah. Amplitude's tracking plan is actually pretty wild. If anyone's running the Chrome extension for Amplitude, you can see their tracking plan, and it's pretty wild to take a look at. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, it is. It's interesting to check out.
Well, I would say like Amplitude being a product analytics tool, they should ideally do a good job at creating a tracking plan. And as you can see, they have separate tabs for events, users, accounts. They even have a tab for taxonomy best practices, which I really like. I even add a separate tab for discussion, because when you're building a tracking plan, you have so many questions, and you rely on different people to answer those questions. So I sort of advocate for that as well. So I mean, yeah, at a glance, it looks pretty comprehensive.
Yeah. So in terms of tracking meaningful events, we don't know what this company does, what this is a sample for, what kind of product, but these are some of the common events they're saying for B2B companies.
Yes.
Would you say that this is tracking meaningful information?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, they are tracking the most common events that are applicable to most B2B SaaS companies. And like every event is pretty obvious. You can understand what it means. I'm not sure what this column does, the business question column. It's a big column. So that's interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting. And this is something that, we see in some tracking plans, which is, trying to tie the business metrics to the event name, which obviously is the goal, but it can be difficult to capture that in a tracking plan.
Yes, I think so. It's, again, like maybe not information that really needs to be in the tracking plan. You can have a separate doc for that. They've got the description, the property type, property name. Okay, so for property type, they don't have the data type of the property. They just have event or user. but we're in the events tab, so technically all these properties should be, most of these should be event properties. I think it's similar to the other one where the Reforge one that had a profile property and then event property, um, but it's missing the data type column, which I think is really important. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, that's
It's
surprising.
interesting that it's missing that. I know. Yeah. See, it's so hard to do this, but even the tools can't do it perfectly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe they're just trying to keep it like less overwhelming because the data type column can be a little intimidating or overwhelming for people. But frankly, it's like super easy to understand once they're literally like you only see 5 or 6 different types, and it's really simple to understand what they mean. Specifying it can be really useful for the engineers at the time of implementation.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's go through our set. So we talked about, is it meaningful? We said that it was, right?
Mm-hmm.
In terms of scalability, how extensible is this plan?
Yeah, I think it's scalable. I mean, they're following a pretty set naming convention. They've got the descriptions. So yeah, it can be scaled.
Yeah, pretty good scalability. Nice job with that amplitude. And then in terms of how human it is and how clear the language is.
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear.
All right, we'll give it again.
You can pretty much understand everything that's documented. So that's good.
And okay, now let's go to documented. Is it well documented?
Yeah, it is well documented, but for me, like not having the data type column is really a deal breaker because like it can make a big difference. I mean, it just seems something so insignificant, but it can make a big difference. Like if people know the right data type, then when they're eventually trying to like let's say create a segment or a cohort or a segment in a product analytics tool or whatever other tool, they'll know whether if they know it's a Boolean property, they know the expected values will be true or false. If they don't know that, they might expect the value to be something else, but then they say true or false, and they're like confused. Or yeah, I mean, there are a bunch of different scenarios where just knowing the property type, they have sample values, so that's pretty good. But just having the property type, I think is really important. And then also like the source where the event is being tracked, client side, server side. Um, Overall, it's pretty great, but I think it's just missing these couple of things.
Okay, we're gonna give him a no then. Well, it's on the fence. It's on the fence. Very close though. A solid plan for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Panel, a mixed panel example. So this is for a media company like Netflix or Spotify. And so they have 3 tabs in here. They have business objectives, which is interesting as its own tab rather than the column situation. And then they have an analytics strategy doc, and then they have the tracking plan. What do you think of this setup for the spreadsheet?
I think it makes sense for mixed panel to share it because it's more educational, so that people understand this stuff. But in your actual tracking plan, I don't think you want to have that analytics strategy tab. Even the business objectives, I'm not sure if you want in your tracking plan. There are better ways to document your business objectives, I think.
I agree with that. I think it's a lot to pack in here.
Yeah, and in any case, I mean, like, this stuff keeps changing. So, yeah, like,
it's not really. It's difficult when you have a large team, right? Each team has its own strategy.
Yeah, exactly.
Too. Yeah.
Yeah. For sure.
All right, let's take a look at the tracking plan.
So yeah, again, I've actually seen this tracking plan before. It's been around for a while.
Yeah.
It's actually interesting. It does have a lot of important things, but again, like it's missing user properties. account properties. It actually has this, I believe, event super user group. Okay, yeah, and this tracking plan is also very specific to how Mixpanel works. So in the property type column, they have something called super, uh, which is like a Mixpanel um, super property. Yeah, it's basically a yeah, it's a Mixpanel entity, I believe. So it's very specific to Mixpanel, I think. It's a little overwhelming because you have one column with event property, and essentially, again, most of these are event properties. Um, the data type column is there. Okay, yeah, and they have the column for client side, server side, so they call it platform. Um, in fact, they've even like gone a step further and specified Android, iOS. So yeah, if you have like Android and iOS apps, then this is obviously really helpful. Um, I actually like the implemented column that we get to know whether an event has been implemented or not. A lot of times, an event might be implemented, but you want to add a new property. So you have this basically at the property level, so you can see if a certain property has been implemented or not, which is I think pretty cool.
Yeah, that's interesting because I guess they would all come with the event, or because there's no check for if the event is implemented. But
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Basically, if all the properties are implemented, then the event is implemented. This is again mixed panel specific, I believe.
yeah, I've never seen
Yeah,
this kind of column, but that's quite detailed for, I guess,
yeah,
on the engineering side for the implementation. That's really
hmm,
interesting. This is quite
yeah,
a robust plan, although it is missing the tabs, as you mentioned, for user properties and account properties.
yeah. I think this plan, since it was created some time ago, at least a couple years ago, it's pretty comprehensive. If someone goes and like sort of tries to update it, they'd be able to do a good job at it because this is it's pretty good by itself, and it just needs to it's just missing those few columns, and then tabs for user properties, account properties. They have the KPI column, which is interesting, like sort of overwhelming, and like I just feel like it's similar to the fact that when you're sort of creating a tracking plan, you want to track so many different things, and you want to basically specify a lot of information, but later on you realize that you won't really use a lot of that information. So I think you can scale gradually. You should start with something simpler, and then if you feel the need, just add more information.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting how people are including that here because it is so key to the data side and it does often get missed. People are often like, oh, I just need to track some data, right? And they don't think about the questions that they're asking.
Yeah.
We do.
You're muted, Lex, for some reason.
Sorry, my
Yeah.
mic got switched. Can you hear me still?
Yeah, you're back.
Okay, sorry. Yeah. Also, what do you think about this watch content 50% situation, taking the 50% into the event name?
Yeah, I've never seen that. It's interesting, but I think for a video app, I believe this could be useful. So basically, they're tracking not just watch content event, but like the percentage. So uh, it's definitely useful information to have. Um, yeah,
Yeah.
they could even like have 25%, 75%. I don't know how they would use this information. I think yeah, maybe like or I'm not sure if it can be, maybe they can have a property for that. um, so the event name can be watch content, and then they can have a property which has these values like 10%, 20%, 50%. I would say that
Yeah.
is better. Otherwise, you'd have like, yeah, you'd have a watch content 50 or watch content 100, watch content
Yeah.
75. That doesn't make sense. Yeah, that's a little odd.
It is odd. It's interesting. It'd be interesting to see how that plays out in the analysis. Well,
Yeah, yeah.
we're running out of time, and I do want to get to, we have Avo's plan here that we wanted to take a
Yes.
look at. And so this is Avo's actual tracking plan, and you can see it's in Avo. And so let's take a look at this. What are your initial thoughts here about what's documented?
It's awesome. It's great.
You're partial.
Now, well, obviously, like since it's not a Google sheet, it obviously makes things a lot better. The categorization, like as you can see, there are 174 events, which means this is obviously something that has been created over a period of time. You don't start with 100 events. So the categorization is really great. Obviously, the taxonomy is great. You have the sources, which is helpful. Maybe you can scroll to the right, show us some more columns. All right.
Yeah.
And then I think to look at the data type for each property, you have to click on an event, right? And then you can like go into it and see more details. Yeah. Well, yeah. Of course. Okay. Yeah. So this is obviously really great, and it won't be fair to compare this plan to a Google Sheet tracking plan because obviously it's interactive.
It's too magnificent. Well, let's give it some scores. So in terms of, is it tracking meaningful information? Is it a meaningful plan?
Yeah, pretty sure it is.
Well, don't feel like you have to say that.
No, but yeah, like you can just tell, right? Like the fact that someone is putting the effort to create the categories, and like categorization itself shows that it's meaningful because someone doesn't have to scroll through 100 events. They can just skip to the category that's relevant. So yeah, definitely meaningful. Interesting to see that some events don't have any properties. So I don't know why that is. Maybe it's intentional, maybe it's not.
Good question. And we're missing some descriptions, so that's not great. Is it scalable in terms of the naming?
Yeah, of course, the naming is proper. You can understand everything, so definitely scalable.
What about in terms of human readable? How human readable is this plan?
Yeah, I think it's obviously human readable. The fact that you can go into each event and see more details, that's obviously great because it reduces the cognitive load. You don't have everything in one single UI, right? So the fact that you don't have data types and stuff, that can be very good for a lot of people. I'm not sure about this. Not sure about the column that says actions, the actions column. It says logs event, but don't all of them just log an event? Or the actions can be different?
They can be different. Yeah.
Okay. So this is more our specific log page view. Okay, interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, there is a lot. You're right. It is a little unfair to compare to the spreadsheet because there's more guidance and things in there. Yeah. Yeah. What about in terms of how well documented it is?
Yeah, of course, pretty well documented. Once again, like you understand what you read, right? So that's pretty great.
Yeah, we're not partial. No, we are. I love it though. Thank you for sharing that. I think we're going to leave it there because we've had so many great tracking plans and we're about to hit the hour. And so why don't we wrap up with just a few? You had mentioned some resources from DataLed.
Yeah.
You want to share those?
Yeah. So there is a tracking plan template that anyone can copy and get started on their tracking plan. It obviously covers the best practices that we discussed, the ones I mentioned. It's obviously a Google Sheet, but it's okay to start with the Google Sheet and then gradually, once you scale, you can go on to a tool like Argo. There's also a guide. So there's a step-by-step guide that covers the process of creating a tracking plan. Also specifies why you should create a tracking plan, so the benefits of creating a tracking plan. So you can share it with your colleagues who don't fully understand the value of creating a tracking plan before you actually start implementing whatever tool you're implementing. You'd actually save you'd save money because you'd save those 1 or 2 months that you'd spend implementing, and the tool is just there while you're not using it. So yeah, I would say these are the two very relevant resources. There's a bunch of other guides that are relevant and useful for anyone, getting started with product analytics. So, or setting up a CDP. So they can obviously check those out. And just to mention, everything is free. So
everything is free. Awesome. And we'll be sharing those in the Slack. And then also we'll do a blog post recap on our blog, and we'll share those links too. And then we also have some sample plans up at the Right Track website. You can get those here. So those are some samples for checkout, for doing an invite flow and onboarding and things like that to get you started. We've done several roundups of those on the blog, and I think they can be a good starting place.
Yeah, and then if you join the Right Track community, you can just reach out to me there directly, and I'm super active in all the Slack communities I'm in. So just ask me anything. I love to answer questions about data. So or on Twitter or on LinkedIn, whatever.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Arpit. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. So it's a lot of fun. Thank you for having me.
We'll see you in Slack.
All right. Thank you. Bye. Thanks for joining.